Melbourne City FC is a professional soccer club based in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. It competes in the country's premier competition, the A-League, under licence from Football Federation Australia. Known until June 2014 as Melbourne Heart, the club entered the competition in the 2010 Euro 11 season after its formation in June 2009. In January 2014, the club was acquired by Manchester City, in partnership with the Australian rugby league club Melbourne Storm. The club is run from a facility based at Trobe University, and plays matches at Melbourne Rectangular Stadium, commercially known as AAMI Park, a 30,050-seat multi-use venue in Melbourne's city centre. A youth squad competes in the National Youth League. A futsal team competes in the F-League. The youth matches are played at Epping Stadium in Epping. History. Origins. After the dissolution of the National Soccer League in 2003, brought about by the Crawford Report, plans were drawn up for a new revamped national competition to begin the following season. Two separate plans put forward by the Professional Footballers Australia and Libera Consulting called for the new league to be established under the name Australasian Premier League, with two Melbourne clubs to feature as foundation members of the competition. One to be playing in the northwest of the city, and another to be playing in the southwest of the city, representing the two population loads of Melbourne. Despite the calls for the new football competition to feature two clubs from Melbourne, in 2004 Football Federation Australia, opting for a one-city, one-team policy, announced that the Melbourne Victory had won the licence to be the only Melbourne club to compete in the new national competition, known as the A-League. A 5-year moratorium was also established preventing any other expansion sides from the 8 original A-League teams areas entering the competition until the 2010 Euro 11 season, allowing Victory 5 seasons to establish itself in the Melbourne market. By 2007 the Victorian Major Projects Minister Theo Theophanous put forward the idea of a second Melbourne club being formed to be a founding tenant at the Melbourne Rectangular Stadium, during the protracted negotiations with Melbourne Victory due to the early design of the stadium being smaller than Victory's then-season average crowd. Speculation about a second Melbourne side progressed, and on February 12, 2007, South Melbourne FC revealed that they were courting approaches from private investors with a prospect of being the second A-League club based in Melbourne. As part of the South Melbourne bid, the club was to be privatised and the bid name was to be Southern Cross FC. On March 1, 2008, former Carlton Football Club vice president and businessman Colin DeLutis expressed his interest in a second Melbourne A-League side, with an approach to the FFA to become sole owner of the second licence with the bid name of Melbourne City. FFA Chief Executive Ben Buckley raised the possibility of expanding the A-League from 8 to 12 teams in May 2008, in readiness for the 2009 Euro 10 season. Buckley also revealed the existence of a third Melbourne bid tentatively known as Melbourne Heart, backed by Peter Sidgwell, to compete with the two other bids of Southern Cross FC and Melbourne City. On July 25, 2008, the Melbourne City bid dropped out of the bidding process, leaving the Melbourne Heart and Southern Cross FC bids as the last two bids standing. By September 2008 the Melbourne Heart bid was awarded exclusive negotiating rights for the league's 11th licence, beating out the South Melbourne-backed Southern Cross FC bid. Negotiations continued until Sidgwell's group was awarded the licence to join the A-League's 2010 Euro 11 season by the FFA on June 12, 2009. First season, 2010 Euro 11, Heart started its inaugural season against Central Coast Mariners on August 5, 2010, at their home ground AAMI Park, losing 1-0. The club's first ever goal was an own goal scored by Ben Kantarovski in the Heart's second league game, a 1-1 draw against Newcastle Jets. Melbourne Heart's first win was a 1-0 victory over North Queensland Fury, which came in the fifth round of their first A-League season on September 4, 2010. They contested the first ever Melbourne derby against Melbourne Victory on October 8, 2010, and won 2-1. In the middle of their season, they went 7 matches without winning and over 5 hours without scoring a goal. This was turned around when they travelled to play Adelaide United and beat them 2-1 in the final 5 minutes, despite trailing at 1-0 for all of the second half up to that time. Heart finished their first season on equal points with Newcastle Jets, but behind on goal difference in 8th position. They failed to make it into the top 6 teams to reach the finals, despite sitting in 6th position for majority of the season. 2011 Euro 12. On July 7, 2011, the club announced it would take part in the inaugural Hawaiian Islands Invitational from 23 Euro February 25, 2012. The squad was set to be made up of emerging youth players as the tournament overlaps with the 2011 Euro 12 A-League season. Taking part in the Invitational was Japan's Yokohama, South Korea's Incheon United FC and reigning MLS Cup winners the Colorado Rapids from the United States. Melbourne Heart drew against AAMI Park and lost 0-1 against Colorado Rapids. Melbourne Heart signed former rival Melbourne Victory player Fred on June 20, 2011, as a marquee player. He replaced Simon Colosimo as captain of the Heart. On September 1, 2011, Heart added the addition of a youth team to the club, which would compete in the A-League's National Youth League. The youth team launched with former Australia international John Aloisi as the inaugural youth team head coach, while highly respected Victorian coach Arthur Poppers was brought in as his assistant. In 2012 the Melbourne Heart futsal team was founded. They play in the F-League, which is top tier of Australian futsal. Melbourne Heart's first game for the 2011 Euro 12 A-League season was against Newcastle Jets at Epping Stadium. The Heart were defeated 3-2, after a goal by Boon Sung Hwan in added time. Heart lost their first 2 matches in a row after being defeated by Perth Glory at home, however they then went on to get 21 points out of 30, making them third on the ladder. After their successful start to the first half of the season, Melbourne Heart only won 2 of their remaining matches, coinciding with the loss of Fred to injury, and Doug Anzik, Aziz Beach and Jason Hoffman to international Eliru's duty. They finished 6th on the ladder, enough to make the finals, and had their best season in the club's history. Heart's first final was against Perth Glory, where they were defeated 3-0 at Nib Stadium. On February 1, 2012, Melbourne Heart coach John Barnship announced he was leaving the club at the end of the season due to family reasons. 2012 Euro 13. Melbourne Heart announced on May 8, 2012 that former Socceroo and Melbourne Heart youth team coach John Aloisi had been promoted from his existing position and signed as head coach for 3 years. During the off-season Heart were stung by the transfer out of several young key players in Curtis Good, Brendan Hamill and Eli Balj. However, key off-season signings included Socceroos Richard Garcia and Vince Grella, and 2 visa players in Croatian striker Josip Tadija and Swiss-Liberian defender Patrick Gerrard. Heart opened the season with a 2-1 win over rival, Melbourne Victory. The first half of the season was plagued however by inconsistent performances which left the club languishing in last place at the end of 2012, due mainly to second half fade-outs. During the January transfer window, Heart lost a further 2 key players in Michael Morone and Aziz Beach on transfers, as well as midfielder Vince Grella to retirement. However, they did bolster the squad with returning striker Eli Balj and Dutch midfielder Marcel Meeuwis. The new year saw more consistent results at home with 4 wins in a row, resulting in a gradual climb up the table. However, a run of poor results saw Heart finish in 9th place out of 10 teams on the A-League ladder, their worst ever A-League finish. Melbourne Heart veterans Clint Bolton, Simon Colosimo, Matt Thompson and Fred, were released by the Heart at the conclusion of the 2012-13 A-League season. 2013 Euro 14. It was announced on January 23, 2014 that the footballing empire City Football Group had acquired Melbourne Heart for $12 million. The deal involves CFG acquiring 80% of Heart, the other 20% to be held by a consortium of businessmen allied to rugby league club Melbourne Storm. On June 5, 2014, the team obtained Spanish World Cup winning striker David Villa on loan from New York City FC, another team owned by the City Football Group. Villa will play in the A-League until New York City enter Major League Soccer in 2015. Ferran Soriano, City Football Group, a unregistered trademark's chief executive, expressed hope that the partnership between Melbourne City FC, New York City FC and Manchester City FC will create synergies between the clubs. Chairman Fernando Soriano stated that the access to global scouting networks and operational experience in football performance, technical development and sports science would be some of the most important synergies shared between the clubs. Name, Colours and Badge. In October 2009, an online competition held by the Herald Sun gave the public the opportunity to submit their preferences for the name of the new Melbourne team. The preferred names were released on the Herald Sun website on November 13, 2009. The four options were Sporting Melbourne FC, Melburnians, Melbourne Revolution and Melbourne Heart FC. Some pondered if Revolution had some context considering its intimation to the Eureka Stockade, the closest Australia has come to Revolution. The name of the new club was to be announced before the end of 2009, but this was delayed until early 2010 due to AFL objections to the use of the words Melbourne, football and club in the name. The Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation expressed concern that the name Melbourne Heart was too similar to its annual Heart of Melbourne appeal, and lodged a protest with IP Australia in January 2010. The club's badge was lodged to IP Australia the same month by the FFA, and on February 2, 2010, the name of the club was announced as Melbourne Heart FC. Initially, a colour scheme of either black and white, or red and white were the two options for the club. The eventual choice was red and white stripes, with a red sash on white for the away kit. Melbourne Heart's home kit is a red and white striped jersey with red shorts and red socks. The away kit is a red sash on white jersey, with white shorts and socks. The design for the team's third kit was chosen from entries submitted by fans. The jersey is grey with a red and white sash, the shorts are white. The 2014 takeover of Melbourne Heart by Manchester City came only days after an application to trademark the name Melbourne City Football Club was lodged on January 16. Coincidentally, Melbourne Heart's minority shareholders also registered the business name Melbourne City FC with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission and bought the domain name melbournecityfc.com. This has led to speculation that Melbourne Heart would be rebranded in line with its new owner's other properties. On June 5, 2014, the club officially changed its name to Melbourne City Football Club. Sponsorship. On February 16, 2010, leading financial institution Westpac teamed up with the Melbourne Heart for a 3-year agreement believed to be worth close to $2 million. They are their principal partner. The Westpac logo appears on the front of the home and away Melbourne Heart kits. The club also hosts 3 Westpac community camps, annually across regional Victoria. Drake International, Public Transport Victoria and BDO are the major sponsors of the club. On September 1, 2011, Park Trent was announced as the Melbourne Heart FC's youth team's primary sponsor. CEO Scott Munn said that the deal is the largest ever National Youth League corporate partnership. On May 8, 2012, the club's new kit supplier Kappa was announced. Kappa are on a 2-year contract with Melbourne Heart. On July 6, 2014, Melbourne City announced a new deal with Abu Dhabi-based airline Etihad, as shirt sponsor. Club facilities. Melbourne Heart bases its training and administrative facilities at La Trobe University. Stadium. Melbourne City's home ground is Melbourne Rectangular Stadium. Melbourne City's largest average season attendance is 9,553, while the largest ever attendance for a single match is 26,457 against Melbourne Victory in round 12 of the 2012 Euro 13 A-League season. Rivalries. Melbourne City's local rivals are Melbourne Victory. Although there were many state or regional rivalries, the Melbourne Derby was the first and only intra-city derby in the A-League until a second Sydney-based club, Western Sydney Wanderers, joined the A-League in the 2012-13 season. The first match between the two clubs saw Melbourne Heart win 2-1 in front of a sold-out AAMI Park crowd of over 25,000 spectators. The derby match between the two Melbourne clubs is often marked as an annual spectacle, both on and off the pitch, attracting large crowd numbers for the high-profile games. The rivalry became more intense in the third meeting of the clubs on January 22, 2011, when Melbourne Victory's Kevin Muscat made a mistimed tackle on Hearts' Adrian Zora, which earned Muscat a red card and an 8-week suspension, and was the direct cause of a season-ending knee injury to Zora. Current squad. Senior squad, as of June 10, 2014. Note: flags indicate national team as defined under FIFA eligibility rules. Players may hold more than one non-FIFA nationality. Youth squad. Note: flags indicate national team as defined under FIFA eligibility rules. Players may hold more than one non-FIFA nationality. Club officials, board, managerial staff, managers, list of Melbourne Heart managers, with respective records, as of March 2, 2014. Only competitive matches are counted. Records. Matt Thompson presently holds the team record for number of total games played with 82 matches. Aziz Beach has the second most appearances for the club with 80 matches. Clint Bolton and Michael Morona share being the third most capped players with 70 matches each. Melbourne Hearts' all-time highest goal scorer is David Williams with 15, followed by Eli Babalj and May Duganda 3/4 year. Hearts' highest home attendance was 26,579, for a League Melbourne Derby match on December 23, 2011. Honours: A-League Finals Series, Appearances, 2011 Euro 12, see also. Expansion of the A-League, Manchester City FC, Melbourne City FC Futsal, New York City FC, References. External links, official website.